I want to tell you tonight before I start the lesson, I'm sure you've seen already, I'm kind of dressed down a little bit tonight. I don't ordinarily do that, and I'm not telling you that because I think you worry about it, because I know that you don't, but I think it's a funny story. So I do want to tell you, this morning when Mia responded to the invitation, desiring to be baptized, well, I've always said we have all kinds of water around here, and this was the day we didn't have any water in there. And we may not for a while because of problems with it right now, but we have a lot of water, right? But the problem was there were storm clouds coming in, so I thought we better hurry because we're going to get in the water whether it's lightning or not. So we grabbed towels and the garments and the waders, and when we got home, I realized the waders were the old waders that leak. So I thought, that's actually not that bad. That's okay. It's not that bad of a leak. So we got to the swimming pool, and what I did not think about was it's also rained a lot lately, if you haven't noticed, and so the pool level was high, and so when I went in, it didn't matter that the waders leaked because the water was above the waders. So I figured those clothes probably ought to go in the laundry, and this is what you get after that. But thankfully, she was baptized today, and we're certainly grateful for that, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story from my junior year in high school, and I believe I've told you this story before, but it really fits what I want to talk about tonight to introduce it, and so I'm going to tell it to you anyway. My junior year of high school, we had a golf team at our high school, and I was on the golf team, and we actually weren't a very good team, but none of the other schools were really that good either, so we got into the state the conference tournament. And so we were at the place where the conference tournament was being held. We had a match that day. It was an 18-hole match for the conference championship. And I went with the second group, which meant that as I was playing with the second best golfers from all the teams from the rest of the conference. And it was a shotgun start. And so the group in front of us was all of the first players. And of course, I knew the one that was my teammate. And I also knew another one. I had known him and his brother for several years. His brother was actually in his first year on the PGA Tour at that time, and this young man was very good too. So I knew that. I wasn't expecting to win. I just wanted to play. I had a great day. I was just a few strokes over par after 17 holes. I was having one of the best matches of my life, actually. And then the problem was I got to the 18th hole, and the first golfers had finished. And they were all standing there watching us. It was a short par three. I don't know how long, but it was a short par three. And so they're all standing there watching us, and I had won the previous hole, so I'm first up at the tee. So everybody on my group is watching, and now all of the best golfers in the conference are standing there watching, and we're close to the clubhouse, so everybody up there is watching, and I am intimately aware of the fact that I am all alone on a tee box. And so I drew back the club, as I always have, and swung through, and the ball hit the heel of the club and went back through my legs to the green that I had just played. Because I wasn't very effective at handling the pressure of being alone. That's our topic tonight. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, Paul said, "At my first defense, no one stood with me, but all forsook me. May it not be charged against them, but the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, so that the message might be preached fully through me, and that all the Gentiles might hear." I think it is a fact of life, probably in every life, that at some point you do find yourself standing alone. But I think it is most definitely a fact of the Christian life that there are times that you will have to stand alone, even when you're not alone. I mean, we're in a society that surely there's nobody that believes that our world's getting better. Surely there's nobody who looks around in our world and thinks that somehow our world is getting closer to God, right? And as long as that is the case, and according to Jesus' teaching, it's always going to be the case that there are more people who are walking the broad way to destruction than there are who are walking the narrow way to life. Since it's always going to be that way, then we have to understand and be motivated and strong enough to stand alone, right? when we have to? I mean, if you think about it, of all of your minutes and hours of the week, the minutes and hours when you're your most strong are when we're all right here together, because you don't face as many challenges when we're all right here together. But then when we leave, how hard is it to stay faithful out there alone? What I want to do tonight is, this is a very simple lesson. I just want to go through some of the accounts that I find in the scriptures where people had to be faithful to God alone, and I hope by doing so to motivate us in our walk with God even today. And I'll start with Genesis 6. I'm not going to do a lot of reading. I'll do a lot of scanning. Maybe there's a little bit of reading, but Genesis chapter 6, I think, is the easy one. It's Noah. Genesis 6:9 tells us that Noah walked with God, and I think that's amazing. I would hope that God would be able to say that about me and you, that we walk with him. But what makes it more amazing with Noah is that he's in a time in which God has looked down on the face of the earth, and he has declared that man's thoughts are only evil continually. And then there's Noah, who stands out. In fact, if you looked over the whole earth at that time, there's only one altar that is burning, the smoke from which goes up and is a pleasing aroma to God. And that's Noah's altar. And I can say that without reservation because of what the text tells us about it, and because of what happens as this flood comes and ends, and there's only 8 people left on the earth. I wonder how hard it would have been to continue to direct your family to God when everyone in the world is still directing their family somewhere else, including other members of his own family. Do you think that was a lonely time for him? And what about when it came time to construct the ark, and God had given him all of these specifications, and he's got to follow that, and he's building a boat, and it's not like he's going to be able to drag it anywhere. It's not like, there's a lake close by with a ramp or anything. He's just building this boat out in the middle of nowhere, and when people have to ask him about it, or do ask him about it, and they asked him about it, he had to tell them that God said it's going to rain, water's going to fall from the sky, though they'd never seen that. And he said the water's going to come to us. How lonely was that message? You suppose he became discouraged? I have to think he did. And yet, even in those circumstances, in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 22, we're told, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so he did. He stood alone. I think that's because he knew what Paul understood in the statement we just read that he wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 4, when he said, even when he was alone, the Lord stood with him. And that's enough, isn't it? That's enough. And then think about Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 and following, God tells Abraham, leave everything you've ever known. I mean, you're living in this land with all of your family, and just leave it. It's a land of paganism, and I'm going to take you somewhere, and I'm going to show you me. And I'm going to show you a land that your descendants will inherit. I will multiply your descendants. I will bless the whole earth through your descendants. And he leaves. He walks with God. How many people told him he'd lost his mind, do you think? How many family members begged him to stay? How many people thought it was foolish? You're not even going to own any of this land. He's going to spend the rest of his life virtually living in tents, and yet he does. And I wonder if we're that committed to leading our family to following God, even if we have to do it alone. And there's probably no time. I mean, leaving home would be enough, but there's probably no time more lonely in the life of Abraham than the account of Genesis 22, verses 1 and following, where we start by reading this. It came to pass that after these things that God tested Abraham. You know the account I'm reading, don't you? He tested him. He said to Abraham, it came to pass after these things that God tested him and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. How alone is that? I mean, he can't share that information with his son. He can't share that information with his wife. He can't share that information with his servants. They get everything together. They travel to worship God. And when they get to the mountain, the servants stay at the base of it, and he goes alone with his son to the top of that mountain. He bounds his son. He binds Isaac. He puts him on the altar. And there's the moment where he has to say, I have to follow through, and he draws back the knife. How alone is that? What could he possibly be thinking? Well, the Hebrews writer tells us in chapter 11, verses 17 through 19, when we read, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, which he also received him in a figurative sense. I don't think anybody else believed that. I think he was alone in his belief. That's why he couldn't share that information. But he stood alone. Why? Well, he knew the Lord stood with him, just like Paul said, and that's what happened when he drew back the knife and God stopped him and there was a ram, right? He stood alone. What about Joseph? Joseph is an incredible example of somebody who stood alone. You start in Genesis chapter 7 and you go through pretty much the rest of the book of Genesis, and it's about Joseph, and that's an interesting thing because Joseph's not even in the lineage of the coming of the Messiah. He is in Abraham's lineage, but not in the lineage of Messiah. He's somebody who's going to be used by God just to protect the seed line of the Messiah. But as a young man, he has some significant problems in his family, and there comes this day where his brothers have had enough, and they sell him into slavery. And if you can imagine, that's not a movie, that's not a story we read in a book, that's an account that actually happened in Joseph's life. Can you imagine him as a young man? Maybe he's believing in his mind that this is some kind of a prank. The brothers maybe play on each other. And yet, as that caravan carries him off into slavery, how significant would have been his tears? And when he gets to this place of Egypt, the country that is not his own, and he gets to this life that is not his own, and he's all alone, how many days do you think he wondered it would be before his brothers showed up and rescued him, or at least his father, somebody? How many nights do you think he cried himself to sleep, waiting to hear from his family? How long do you suppose it was before he gave up? A week, 2 weeks, 6 months, a year? Not only is he alone, but he's in a place where nobody worships God. They have all kinds of gods in Egypt, but not the God. So he's the only one that knows what it means to worship him. He's the only one that knows what it means to sacrifice to him, to serve him. And yet he does, all alone. And God blesses him. He ends up in Potiphar's house. For how long? I don't know. But he stands alone in Potiphar's house when everybody, even Potiphar's wife, turns against him, and he ends up in prison alone. I wonder, how many of us, if you found yourself suddenly in no fault of your own or no control of your own, if you found yourself in a situation where you were in a country that wasn't your own, that wasn't your people, that you didn't know anybody, that there was nobody there that worshiped the God of heaven, could you do it? Could you do it alone? Joseph did. The thought kind of scares me a little bit because there are so many people who don't show up to worship God on the first day of the week here. How hard would it be if you were there alone? And I'm not trying to criticize us, I'm trying to motivate us. There's a reason that in Hebrews chapter 11 we have the account of all of those individuals who walked by faith, and that reason is because those witnesses or those examples motivate me, encourage me, strengthen me. And I think that's what these accounts do tonight. They encourage us and strengthen us to be able to understand, even when we're alone, God stands with us. Then there's Daniel. If you remember our Old Testament studies, as we went through the chronological period of when Israel has already been taken captive by the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians had captured the Assyrians, and now they're on the doorstep of Judah, and in 605, Nebuchadnezzar attacks Jerusalem, and he takes captive some of the young men, 18, 19, 20-year-old, that are handsome and they're intelligent, and they're going to be used, they're going to be retrained. Their whole lives are going to be changed. And the purpose of doing so is when they become virtual Chaldeans, if you will, then they will be able to better assimilate and control the rest of Judah that Nebuchadnezzar now has power over. So Daniel's one of those young men. And there's a period of time of all of this training and all of this changing. And one of the things that comes up has to do with his diet. And whatever it was about the diet that comes up, Daniel says, I just can't do that. I can't do that because that would be in violation of my God. So in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, when everybody's eating, and it's certainly expected of the servants, we're told this, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. And therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Can you imagine him? Can you imagine the account? And I don't know how many of these young men are there, and I don't know how many people were, what their circumstance was and how many people were over them or all of that. But when they're getting all their instructions and their names are changed, and can you imagine Daniel's hand going up and saying, yeah, I can't do this? Well, you don't have that right. Yeah, no, I can't do this. And yet evidently his integrity had shown up so much that they actually allow him to change his diet and they do better. And of course there were other people there that we know actually were with him and doing the same thing, but based on the way the account reads, I think Daniel's kind of the encourager. He's kind of the leader in that account. And he's an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid. And about 60 years later in Daniel chapter 6, when Darius the Mede is now over all of the land, Darius readjusts. He wants better control. And so he takes 120 men and he puts them over the different sections of his land. And then he takes 3 men and he puts those 3 men over the 120. He's kind of setting up a way to make it easier for him to rule. And then he takes 1 man of those 3 and makes him over the 3 even. And it turns out because of his character and integrity, that's Daniel. But they can't have that. Because it doesn't matter that he's maybe 80 years old at this point. He's still a slave, isn't he? So they can't have that. And so because of their jealousy, the others come up with a plan, and they go to the king and they manipulate him. And they get him to make a law because they praise him. They flatter him. And he writes a law that nobody can pray to anybody except for him for 30 days. Or else you'll be thrown into the lion's den. Well, that doesn't bother Daniel because Daniel stood alone before. And so in Daniel 6 and verse 10, we're told that when Daniel heard or knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. You see it? He's been standing alone all along. And yet God has stood with him all along, and that doesn't change now. Of course, you know the account. As soon as they see that that's what happened, which they knew that's what would happen, even against the king's wishes, that Daniel has to be thrown into the lion's den. And I'll tell you, there's probably never been a time in his life where he's been more alone than he was in that lion's den. But he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone because God stood with him, even in the lion's den. And then even in the same book, you back up in between the 2 accounts we just talked about, to Daniel chapter 3, and you meet 3 young men who were with him in Daniel chapter 1 in the account with the food and all of that. And those men were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you know about those individuals. And you know that Nebuchadnezzar had built this image, and everybody was commanded to bow down before this image. And that's a problem for these 3 young men. They cannot do it. And evidently when the first opportunity arises, everybody does bow down, but them. Can you imagine? I don't know how many people there would have been there that day, but if you had a field out here and you say you had 1,000 people in it or 5,000 people, and everybody at the same time is supposed to bow down to this image, and everybody, can you imagine what it looks like to have 3 guys out there standing all by themselves? And that's what it looked like. He becomes angry. Nebuchadnezzar does, that they didn't bow down. I mean, they're also servants, and they've made him look bad here. Standing up to the authority of the ruler? No, you can't have that. And so maybe he thinks they don't think he means business. So he says he'll give them another chance. I'm going to give you another chance. And they respond in Daniel 3, verses 17 and 18 with this. They say, If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And that's one of my favorite verses in all the Bible. I mean, listen to what they say. Look, we can't do it. We can't do it. And we serve a God that can save us from it. But I'll tell you something, even if he doesn't do that, even if he chooses not to save us from the fire, we're still not going to bow down. He's still worthy of our worship. I think there's this false belief today that, if God doesn't do all these good things in my life, if he doesn't give me exactly what I want, if he doesn't protect me from whatever storm is out here, then I'm not going to serve him. And God is worthy of our worship no matter what our circumstances are. God never promised to take us from the fire. He promised to walk with us through the fire. And so in Daniel chapter 3, when these 3 men are thrown into the fire, the king looks in there and he says, hey, there's something wrong. We threw 3 people in there. I see 4. Because, well, like Paul said, the Lord stood with them. And then there's the obscure account. You've heard about him because I've talked about him and Rich preached about him. He's in 1 Kings chapter 22. He's a prophet of God. His name is Micaiah. And at this time, Ahab is the wicked ruler of the northern kingdom of Israel, and Jehoshaphat is the ruler of the southern kingdom of Judah. And Ahab has this piece of land that he thinks should belong to him. It's in an area called Ramoth Gilead. But the problem is the Syrian king has control of that. And so Ahab says, I want to go to battle, and I want to defeat them, and I want to get this land back, but he's afraid. And so he goes to talk to Jehoshaphat, and he says, I'd really like for you to take the armies of Judah and go with me, and then we can win this battle. And Jehoshaphat says, yeah, I'll do that, but I'd like to know what God says about it. And so Ahab calls in 400 prophets. And he says, tell us what we should do. And all 400 of those prophets in unison say, go. I mean, God's going to be with you and he's going to give you the victory. And yeah, absolutely, you should go. And Jehoshaphat says, there's something wrong with this. There's something wrong with this. Is there any other prophets that you have? And Ahab says, yeah, I've got one more. He's got 401 prophets, evidently. He says, I've got one more, Micaiah, but he hates me. He never says anything good about me. And Jehoshaphat says, well, I want to hear about this. So these servants are sent from Ahab to Micaiah, and they say, listen, we've had all these prophets come in, 400 of them. They told the king the same thing. Please come in. Just tell him the same thing. So Micaiah comes in and he tells him the same thing. And evidently Ahab heard something in his voice that knew that he didn't mean that. And so he said, quit being sarcastic, basically. Just tell us the truth. And Micaiah said, I saw Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep with no shepherd. He said, you're going to be defeated and you're going to be killed. And Ahab said, see, he hates me. But the point is the same God wants him to say. And yet he did it. And you know what? I can't tell you a single name of the 400 prophets, but I know who Micaiah is because he stood alone. Let me close with one more. Jesus himself. The group of soldiers arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and here's what we read, 6 and 56. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. You know, he's human, right? You know, he became man. He experiences the same struggles that we experience, and at that moment, you have to know that it would be lonely, right? He knows what he's going to do. He's going to go through with this, but he's going to go through it alone. And at no point in his trials does he ever have the support from others. And in fact, on the cross, in Matthew 27 and verse 46, he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's doing it alone. Because that was God's plan all along. And yet you know that God stood with him. And here's the thing. As a Christian, because of the fact that he did that alone, I don't ever have to be alone. I mean, he would tell us, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6. I can say that because he did it alone. Why is it the case that walking with God sometimes is lonely? I think there's one answer, and that is because we're in a world where shining a light in the darkness causes people discomfort. That's an open rebuke, and nobody likes that. But if you're going to be a Christian, well, you don't talk like the world, and you don't dress like the world, and you don't treat your marriage like the world, and you don't treat your job like the world, and you don't treat worship like the world, and you don't have the same value system as the world. And the end result of that is that sometimes you stand alone. Maybe that's where you are now. I don't know where you are, but here's what I do know. I do know that wherever you are, if you're a Christian, the Lord stands with you. And I don't think you could make it without him. I don't think I could either. But maybe it's the case tonight that you're here and you're not a Christian. You want him in your life. You want him to stand with you. You've got to open the door. He's at the door knocking. You just got to open the door, and you do it his way. If you believe he is the Son of God, you turn away from your sins in repentance. You confess his name before man. You're buried in baptism. Your sins are washed away by God himself. You know, these people that think you're trying to earn something, what in the world could you possibly earn by that, doing that? You don't earn anything. You allow God to save you. You unite yourself with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, Romans 6, 3-5. And by the way, we still don't have water here, but we've still got water. We'll do it tonight. If you're a Christian who turned away from him, he's not standing with you if you walk away from him. But he's still waiting for you to come back. So whatever your needs